Hi everybody, thanks for coming to this SureWeb webinar. Today we're very excited for a number of reasons. One is that we have a lot of people that registered to this webinar and are attending currently. Some of them are current partners, resellers of SureWeb product, and other that guess were just interested in the topic, which is great. Just to tell you a little bit of housekeeping items, today's webinar is recorded. You will be sent a link to the recording in the next 24 to 48 hours. If you have to leave, don't worry about it. The reason that we're so excited today is that we have a very special guest, Eric O'Neill, former FBI agent, that's here to tell us a little bit about himself and a lot about ransomware in 2019. I'd like to welcome to the webinar, Eric. Eric, thanks for being here. Can't hear you. Eric, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can
there
you hear me now? Perfect. Yes, technology.
Great.
So much fun. Well, once again, hello to everybody out there, especially everybody out there in Vegas who is watching this webinar, and to everybody who is going to not watch it live, but see it later through a link. I'm glad that all of you who have jumped on, and I see that the attendees are going up, and that always makes me feel great. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to start with some espionage and spies. We're going to get to talking about a lot to do with ransomware, everything you ever wanted to know about ransomware. And at the end, I'm going to take some questions and answers. So hold your questions, and if there's something you really got to know, anything, what it was like to catch a spy, what it's like to work with Hollywood actors like Ryan Phillippe on the movie Breach, or anything about ransomware, I am happy to field those questions. So, not to waste all my time.
Let me just jump in, Eric. So for everybody that's attending that has a question, we invite you to participate. The way to ask your question is in the software that we're using. You have a Q&A section in the tool. Put in your questions now throughout the whole presentation, and we'll just get back to them at the end. Just to run you down quickly on the agenda, right now Eric's going to do his presentation about ransomware and himself. We'll talk a little bit about SureWeb and what we can do to help with the security and the need for IT security, and then we'll get to that Q&A session. So sorry, right back to you, Eric.
Hey, no worries at all. And while you guys are watching, I'll be blinding myself with these lights so you can see me well on this webcam. Here we go. So I'm Eric O'Neill. If you didn't know about my background, I was in the FBI. I'm not now. I now run a investigative company called the Georgetown Group, among many other things. I'm a new author, and I'm a pretty prolific public speaker, a little bit too much if you ask my wife and kids. Most of what I talk about now is cybersecurity, and I've got a lens in how I speak about cybersecurity. It's about spies, because my last case in the FBI was the investigation of our worst spy in US history. And by worst, I mean he was the most successful spy who did the most damage. So our worst spy. His name was Robert Hanson. Hanson was caught in February 2001. For the months prior to his arrest, I worked undercover within an office at FBI headquarters to first determine whether he was the spy we were after, and then find out how we could catch him. And after a long series of months and a lot of hard work, we were able to catch him red-handed in the act of making a drop that looked exactly like this. This is actually his last drop to the Russians under a footbridge in Vienna, Virginia. He was, of course, hoping to get paid. He didn't, because we caught him before he could go collect the money. We collected it. Thanks, Russians. That's $50,000 that we can use here in the US. He wasn't just a worst spy in US history, though, and during the time that he spied, he gave up some of the worst secrets that have been given to a foreign power. Nuclear secrets. Now remember, he started spying, he spied for 22 years, so he began spying for the Soviet Union, and he spied so long, he survived the corrupt collapse of the Soviet Union and the reformation into the Russian Federation, which of course was supposed to be a little bit more democratic, but with Putin having his way, it's not really looking that way. He survived that collapse when KGB officers and agents were fired. And these top spies in the Soviet Union were selling secrets, usually to the FBI or the CIA, sometimes MI5 or 6, and they were trading with us, and we were catching all these spies. But we never caught Robert Hanson. So despite the fact that he had people killed, that he gave up massive operations, nuclear secrets, our continuity of government plan, and many, many other things, and if you read my book, Gray Day, I go into all of it. We never caught him because he was different. Hanson wasn't just our worst spy in US history, a spy that from within the FBI, within counterintelligence in the FBI, stole secrets from many different agencies and gave them to a foreign power who was our enemy. He was our first cyber spy. And it's because he was our first cyber spy that he was able to get away from it for so long. You see, Hanson was able to steal information from computer systems at the FBI that unfortunately were never meant to defend against a trusted insider. And what's really important about Hanson is that Hanson marks a sea change, a complete wave in how espionage would continue throughout the years after him. He was our first cyber spy, and that's why this is so important right here. I say this all the time, and I love watching the faces of my audience. I wish I could see you guys. There are no hackers. I've learned this since catching Robert Hanson. There are no hackers. There are only spies, because hacking is nothing more than the necessary evolution of espionage. As we took that information that used to be in paper and we put it in computer systems, the spies had to evolve. They had to change how they access that information. Because remember this about cyber spies, cyber criminals, cyber attackers. They don't get paid. They don't win unless they beat us. If you're a CISO or you're in cybersecurity, I mean, you get your salary, right? But these bad guys have to win. So the spies who make their bread and butter stealing information had to evolve to steal from the computer systems where we now put them. And of course, we're networked. We transfer information as fast as possible. We want it to be as convenient and efficient as possible. And that has opened the door for spies. So Robert Hanson, the spy I caught, that last big spy in the FBI, was our first cyber spy. And the lessons we can learn from him translate to everything that is happening today in a world, an age of massive cyber attacks. Let's talk a little bit about ransomware. Let's talk about the ransomware threat, and let's go back in time a little bit. Ransomware has really been around since before 2013, but it really hit. It hit in a way that all of the press stood up and noticed in the Sony Pictures attack. That was 2014. Imagine if you work for Sony Pictures and you arrive to the offices in Culver City and go to sit down and log into your computer system and you see this screen, hacked by the GOP. Now that's not the grand old party. It's not the Republicans who hacked Sony Pictures. You know, maybe they're mad about some movies. It was the Guardians of Peace, which is really ironic because it was actually the North Koreans who were really angry at Sony for a number of reasons, but mostly because of the movie, The Interview. You can go watch the movie. It's actually pretty funny, but it takes a pretty hard stance against the tyrant who runs North Korea. He gets killed in that movie, assassinated in a glorious way for film. And if you are the tyrant who runs North Korea and you have thousands of hackers and cyber attackers who work for you, you can do things like lock Sony Pictures by ransomware. So Sony, the employees get there, they sit down at their computer screens, they see this screen, all of the data is encrypted. And not only was it encrypted, the North Koreans stole it, put it out on the internet. So movies that will never get made, screenplays that will never be made into movies, massive and lasting damage by this ransomware attack. And then of course, this one, our first cyber pandemic. The WannaCry attack in May of 2017 was one of the most extreme examples of how a cyber attack can be weaponized. This, once again, was North Korea. I know, it's not, I don't mean to pick on them. We're going to get to the Russians and everybody else later. But in May of 2017, they're just angry at the world, I guess, bought or stole or acquired a malware from a vulnerability called Eternal Blue that was stolen from the NSA by a group called the Shadow Brokers. I know it gets a little crazy, but this is espionage, ladies and gentlemen. These are spies. And they weaponized it and they used it against Windows systems. Now, what's interesting here is people like me were on Fox News and MSNBC and everything, jumping out there and saying, patch your systems if you use this version of Windows. In fact, just patch your systems. It's one of the best ways to prevent against these sort of attacks. Turns out that no one really listened. 300,000 computers over 150 countries. That's a pandemic by any stretch of the imagination. Were bricked. They were encrypted, the data was encrypted, you're not going to get it back unless you had a good backup, no way to get it back. And there was no way to pay to get an encryption key. All of this stuff that you see in the bottom of the image, it's all fake. You could send Bitcoin, you were sending it out to the void. This was just a malicious attack to cause damage. So I got back up on CNN and Fox and MSNBC and everybody in Morning Joe, and I said, patch your systems, it's coming again. 1 month later, not Petya, because we have pretty bad branding in cybersecurity, hits. And this one is the same variant as WannaCry. The same one. If you'd patched for WannaCry, it wasn't going to hit you. If you patched after we told you after WannaCry, it wouldn't hit you. But 150,000 more computers are hit around the world. This is the ransomware threat. And of course, my favorite. This one's called Popcorn Time. It's not a big one. You know, it's maybe $150, $300 to get your decryption key, but I love it just because of the way that they send it. I love it in, by the way, a very nerdy way. You have two options to decrypt. You have the fast and easy way, which is pay money in Bitcoin to them, right, through a virtual wallet, or the nasty way. And this is what I like about the sort of social engineering of this ransomware attack. The nasty way is if you send this attack, if you send this file to all of your friends and two of them click and get locked and they pay, you get unlocked for free. So how many of you out there would think, who's the most gullible of my friends that I don't really like very much? Well, then you get into ransomware. And as we're going to see, ransomware is a big, booming business. And it's changed. So when I say there are no hackers, there are only spies, we have to talk about how ransomware has become a big vector for sophisticated attackers. We call them the big game hunters. Now, they don't really look like this. If they look like this, that would be pretty cool, right? I mean, if a cyber attack group dressed like this and looked like this, I don't know, I'd be kind of behind them, but they look more like that, right? They're targeted, they're low volume, high return ransomware deployments, and they're after enterprise installations. They want big targets like cities and municipalities and entire businesses. These are the kind of guys who, if they were cyber criminals, would go after a major company like Sony or a hospital or anyone who's going to pay. And what's happened, cities are under siege, constantly under siege. Let's look at this. Atlanta. This is all, by the way, this year. Atlanta was hit by the SamSam ransomware. They asked for a $40,000 ransom. Now, Atlanta didn't pay. And the FBI will tell you not to pay. And there are good reasons not to pay. First of all, if you get hit by ransomware, right? And as what happened with Atlanta, city services and programs are affected. You know, utilities, parking, court services, you couldn't use any of it. I mean, the services were forced to use hand-drawn stuff in order to get their services going. You'd like to pay a bill or something. Then you've got to think about whether you pay. But the other problem is you pay and you can become a repeat victim. And this happens all the time. You end up being a repeat victim of ransomware because you paid and they come back and get you, or they leave malware behind, or they've stolen your information anyway. And at the end of the day, if you've been hit by ransomware and they've stolen your information and you've been locked and you pay the decryption, well, you still have to go through all the steps to fix the problem. Steps like this, $9.5 million to recover for that city. And it goes on. Baltimore was hit by Robinhood ransomware. These are just different vectors of malware that encrypt and lock computer systems. Now, the interesting thing about these big game hunters and why they're so successful at getting like a city is they attack quietly. And what they do is they quietly gain access to more and more systems, usually starting with a spear phishing attack or a Trojan, and they get one account and then they move laterally through systems to get as many as they possibly can. Once they have a critical mass of systems, they execute the ransomware attack and lock all of them at once. That causes massive pressure on something like the city of Baltimore, who literally couldn't do anything, and they've just come out of it. Once again, it was a $76,000 ransom, and it cost them $18 million to recover. And many of the city's systems were completely down and unable to be used. And it increases. Lake City, Florida, their IT network was infected with malware around June 10 of this year, so right around the corner. And the city described it as a triple threat. So what happened was an employee opened a document they received via email. It was a spear phishing attack, and that is how they were able to get into all of the different systems. It was a ransomware called Ryuk. Ryuk is causing a lot of problems. The big game hunters love it. And now you'll see, this was the third Florida city hit in the last month. That ransom went up to $460,000, right? Why? Because Lake City can see Atlanta and Baltimore and that they didn't pay and what it cost to recover. And here's the other interesting thing. Some of these cities who get attacked, or some businesses who get attacked, will say, I can't pay. But the attackers will steal information from them while they've got them locked, when they're doing the research, when they're slowly, quietly, for months at a time, and sometimes years, learning about their systems and infiltrating, like spies. And there was one city who came back and said, we can't pay. We could never pay that. And so the attackers sent the financials to them and said, yes, you can. Here's your financials. We know exactly what you can pay. And then recently, the same Ryuk ransomware was used against the Georgia court system. Nobody could go to court and have their cases heard, $400,000. And it goes on, and it will continue until we get ahead of the problem. Ransomware attackers are lurkers. You know what lurkers are? Kind of the people, like, if you're on it's a sort of a video game term, but I like to think of it as the person who logs on to the conference call and just sort of listens and doesn't announce themselves to see if they can pick up any good gossip. These ransomware attackers will sometimes, especially the big game hunters, lurk in the network for months. They gather financial data, they identify valuable intellectual property. What they want to do is strengthen their bargaining position, right? And that's how they operate. They start with something like a basic, very basic banking Trojan or email phishing attack. So you get an email, you shouldn't click on the link, you click on the link, and boom, you're hit. What they'll do is they'll also exploit these bad passwords. And here's the thing about passwords. Here's the problem with passwords. In 2017, remember the Verizon data report? They came out and said that 81% of successful breaches come through a bad password. It's not as bad anymore, but it's still pretty bad. Just last year, there was the collection one. It wasn't a breach, but it was a collection of hundreds of millions of usernames and passwords that were dumped on the web, 22 million passwords that were unhashed or completely in the open. So you could just look at the person's password and look at their username. The most common one was still password 1, and then after that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or sometimes 7, 8, depending on what the IT requires. So we're not good at password security. We're not good at email security. People are not good at stopping from being tricked by social engineering. So these bad passwords and email phishing, it spreads through unpatched systems. Remember WannaCry and NotPetya? People don't patch either. We're making it so easy for the bad guys. As they add additional user accounts and escalate privileges, and they install additional malware until they've got a critical mass of systems, and then what do? They strike. They strike and lock with ransomware, and then they set the ransom based on what they think that the entity can pay, the city, the business, the person, because they've also looked at all the financials, like I said. Here's a great case. Triton is not ransomware. Triton is known as the world's most murderous malware. Well, it is, and it could be. So to tell a little bit of story, there's a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia, and recently there was an attack. So it was last year we learned about all of this. In 2014, attackers started sending spear phishing emails to the petrochemical plant until they could overcome the IT corporate network. Once they were in the IT corporate network, they very quietly, over 3 years, spent their time gaining accounts, just like I said in the last slide, gaining access, until finally they found a firewall whose policy management wasn't set right. And they were able to get through the firewall laterally and get into the plant's network. So you actually want to get in the plant if you want to do damage. You know, the IT network's great, the corporate network's fine, you can learn stuff, but if you want to do damage, you got to get in the plant. They got in the plant, and they were able to get into an engineer's workstation. And once they did that, they were able to steal the firmware and the software for the safety control units. Now, the safety control units in industrial facilities are automatic devices that shut things down when there's going to be a catastrophic event. Like, for example, in a petrochemical plant, a gas leak or a poisonous chemical leak. Those safety control systems are supposed to recognize that and shut that down before people get hurt. And what the attackers did is, over time, quietly, they were able to steal the firmware and software for the safety control units, reverse engineer it, and upload their own reprogrammed firmware for these control units. And the malware that they used is called Triton. They got very lucky. 3 years later, before they could launch their attack against this Saudi petrochemical plant, an error in the programming code triggered all of the safety control units at once. The funky thing is, once the safety control units were triggered, the plant shut down. The plant managers tried to restart it twice before they finally called in the white hats and said, we might have a cyber problem. There might be an error. Can you find it? Turned out it was malware, and it was amazing that these attackers had been in there for 3 years. It's believed that it was either the Iranians or the Russians, and depending on who you talk to, it's one or the other. I'm kind of pointing the finger at the Iranians. Maybe that's too convenient because it's a Saudi and they kind of hate each other. But some of the code was Cyrillic and points back toward Russians. Either way, it's bad news because there have been 2 cases. Now, they're anonymous. We don't know which companies, but in our critical infrastructure here in the United States, where this Trojan malware was found in this last year. And apparently the Trojan malware had been there for a full year. Whether this is staging for attacks later or whether this is actually getting ready for an attack, we don't know, but it's trouble. If you paired Triton with ransomware, where you shut down all the safety controllers, then you locked all the systems, you'd have like that TV show Chernobyl, where people actually have to go into the plant and physically turn things off, and that could cause a lot of death. So bad stuff, but this is how spies are operating. So why are we so vulnerable? Let's just talk about the email for a little bit, because email is one of the reasons we've got so many problems. I know another cyber guy talking about email and why email's dooming us, but it is so true. As much as we all know that this is how most of the breaches are coming about, we don't seem to be able to stop it. And it's so simple. This is an actual email that I get. I get maybe 50 to 100 spear phishing emails a day. Just everybody wants to get the cyber guy. I have to be very careful. This is one that's a really pathetic attempt. I mean, everything from, I don't think that Apple is going to send you an email from this email address. It's pretty sad. We detected unusual activity. Someone uses it logged on a different device. Okay, that's not good English. I think the people at Apple have better writers. And then finally, you're never going to get this big click here. I mean, that's just silly. But people click. It turns out that 23% of employees click on these links, click on these emails, get fooled by the social engineering. So we need technology in order to beat that problem. We're not going to win just by training it out of people. And of course, this is the deadliest email. I'm an author, so I like to use a little bit of foreshadowing every once in a while, right? This was pulled off WikiLeaks. This is where I got it. This is the email that was sent to John Podesta, the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And you'll see that it was sent on Saturday, March 19th. This would have been very, very early in the morning. So Podesta doesn't see it until he's going through his email on his phone over coffee on Sunday morning. It comes from Ukraine and it says, Google, stop this sign-in attempt. You should change your password immediately. And it gives you a change password. Now here you see that it's a bit.ly, a shortened link, and on his phone, it would have had a red click here. He didn't click, he sent it to his chief of staff, who sent it to his IT manager, and the IT manager wrote back in an email, this is a legitimate email. That was a mistake. He meant to say this is not a legitimate email. But damn, you autocorrect. Either Podesta or his assistant saw that this is a legitimate email, thought that's great, click that big red button, changed the entered username, entered password, entered the password he would like to change it to, and basically, which was a mock dummy website, and gave 60,000 of his Gmail emails from 2003 all the way to 2016 to the Russians, who then, of course, weaponized it and dumped the most pertinent emails on WikiLeaks, and the rest is history. It literally is history. Regardless of your politics, we really don't want the Russians being able to attack us, and especially not our politics. They can mind their own business. Thank you very much. So like I say, the new Verizon data report, 94% of malware is delivered through email. And it's because we are, I guess as a species, humans, we're good at being fooled by people. That's why fraud is so rampant, and that's why cyber attacks are so successful. Ransomware, by the way, is the second biggest malware threat out there. It accounted for 24% of malware-related breaches. I know a lot of people are saying that ransomware is on its way down. Ransomware is on the rise. They're just targeting bigger enterprises now instead of just individual people. They don't want grandma and grandpa anymore to make $100. What they want is thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because they could shut down a city. And 81%, this is that 2017 statistic, 81% of hacking related breaches were from stolen or just weak passwords, including passwords people guess by going through your social media. So why is ransomware so successful? I mean, it's crazy. We keep getting hit by ransomware. If you're out there and you've ever been locked by ransomware, if you ever booted up your computer or your computer flashed when you clicked on something and rebooted itself into some angry, mean screen asking you to send money in order to ever get your data anymore, so you feel like your home was broken into, I feel really bad for you. I do, because it can be terrible. But it's successful because it's a business. The fact of the matter is that ransomware works. The cost of ransomware, just ransomware to global business, right, was $1 billion in 2016, $5 billion in 2017, and it's predicted to be $11.5 billion by the end of this year. I mean, that's crazy, right? It's a successful business. And the fact of the matter is they will target their victim. They will spend time researching, learning, and targeting the victim. So ransomware targets businesses that are obviously most likely to pay. If you're not likely to pay, if you've got great cybersecurity, if you're using a good backup solution, if you're using endpoint security, if you're doing all the smart things to make it hard for them, criminals aren't going to waste their time. They're lazy. They want to get paid. They're going to go after those who they research and know aren't very good at cybersecurity. And they're also going to look at businesses who get put in a massive pressure situation if they get locked by ransomware. So the highest businesses who get attacked by ransomware, the most likely ones are into infrastructure, because right now, if people can't get their lights and their power, their water, their gas, in their homes, if we can't use our cell networks or get into our banks, if our ATM machines are shut down, people start to panic, people start to get very upset. The kids can't use their iPads, they have to play board games, and everybody becomes miserable. So infrastructure is a big target. Medical, if doctors and nurses can't use computer systems, can't take x-rays, can't send information from the patient directly to the doctor's offices, they go back to pen and paper, and that can be very dangerous. Financial, obviously, if your money is at risk, you're going to be very worried. If you can't log into your online account, you get very, very worried about what's happening to your money that exists basically in numbers, because data is now the currency of our lives, especially for a business. And if you're a business, you worry about your data every minute of the day. And then, of course, industries with heavy customer data, the hotel chains who lose all their information and it's all dumped online, all the massive mega breaches, Facebook, who has breached 50 million user accounts, the Starwood chain, 500 million user accounts, Yahoo, who was breached in 2013 and 14 by the Russians, who lost 3 billion usernames and passwords. I mean, these massive data breaches can crush us. And then finally, small businesses who lack cybersecurity. Why? The attackers really don't care. They really don't care how successful you are or what you have, or whether you're inventing the most amazing thing that they can steal and somehow sell, really what they care about is whether you're vulnerable. Because at the end of the day, they're kind of lazy. They want to go after the low risk, high reward, not very difficult targets. So the most important factor for whether you get attacked by a ransomware attack, any cyber attack, is whether you've left yourself vulnerable. It's also a supply chain business. So I love this stat. From 2016 to 17, right? And we'll update these stats as we go along. There's been a 2,502% increase in the sale of ransomware on the dark web. You see, you can find this stuff on the dark web for next to nothing. Usually what will happen is it might get developed by very sophisticated attack groups that are part of intelligence units in places like Russia or China or North Korea. And then when they're done with it, they'll dump it on the dark web and they'll sell it, or they'll buy other intelligence units malware because they want to hide who they are when they launch attacks. There are currently, we did some research on the dark web, 6,300 plus estimated dark web marketplaces that are all selling ransomware. That's 45,000 product listings on, and when we're talking about dark web, we're talking about those hidden sites that you use special browsers like the Onion router, the Tor network to access, and going on the dark web into these places. I like to describe it as, diving into a dumpster filled with dirty razor blades behind a bio waste plant, right? You can get all sorts of bad things when you go into there. But we go into there because this is how you find out where the next attack is coming from. And there is a lot of this out here. The prices, by the way, for do-it-yourself ransomware, you can be a ransomware attacker tomorrow if you like. The kits range from 50 cents, for cheap ransomware that might get your grandpa, to $3,000, where maybe you get a business, lock a business and make a little bit more. The median price for ransomware right now is about $10. And this stuff is not hard to deploy. It's malware. You use it, you send it out to a bunch of email addresses. You can buy tons of those on the dark web too, and you see who you hit. And it's booming. So if you take a look at this slide, and I love this slide, you can make more money as a software developer who's sitting in a country that doesn't have extradition to the US, that's kind of important, by buying a ransomware toolkit, developing ransomware, selling it on the dark web, and or a combination of the three, launching ransomware attacks. You can develop ransomware, a great new strain of ransomware, sell it on the dark web, and there's even an economy of scale where you can make a VIG, you can make a cut, you can take a cut for all of the successful attacks, everyone who buys your ransomware succeeds in launching. I mean, it's a pretty booming business, and you can see that you're making even more money than the USA. A lot of these guys are out in like Russia, where Russia says, to their cyber criminals, as long as you're hitting the West will look the other way. And then on the other side, of course, there's no extradition. So when we indict them, and we have indicted dozens of Russians, the Russians don't send them to the US to sit in court. So it's a pretty booming business. And if your job prospects are really low, like you're in Romania or Ukraine or Lithuania, look at those places where you're going to be making almost nothing as a software developer, you might go into ransomware. Oh, by the way, you're a criminal, right? So that's all tax-free. Yeah, incentive, right? But there are other costs to business, and Acronis does a lot of thought leadership on these different costs to business and the actual cost to business of ransomware. Damage and destruction and loss of data. Obviously, you really can't, unless you have the right technology, you have to assume that whatever information was locked might be damaged, changed, disrupted, or lost. So you really have to go back, even if you buy the key and decrypt, go back and verify everything, and that can cost a lot of money. Downtime like Sony, it was weeks and weeks before they were able to get back up. If you were the city of Baltimore, it was months. They're only just getting back into the swing of things. Lost productivity. If people can't work, well, I was an attorney. I worked for one of the big law firms. This happened after I left, too bad. But the firm got hit by a massive ransomware attack, and all the associates came in, and the partners said, you might as well go home, you can't work. The problem with that is if you're an attorney, billable hours, you kind of want to be working, because if you're not working, you're on vacation. If you hadn't planned for it, you're just sitting at home grim and angry. Post-attack disruption to the normal course of business. We got to do a lot of things after that, and that might include the forensic investigation cost to figure out what happened and prevent it from happening again, the damage to your reputation. That harm can be extraordinary, especially if people decide, I don't want to use their product because I don't trust that they're not going to lose my data. And then finally, employee training. Now, the interesting thing here is the cost to the business after the ransomware attack can be astronomical. If you look at like Baltimore and Atlanta, it was in the high millions of dollars, $9 and $18 million respectively. The cost to improve cybersecurity and invest in cybersecurity before the attack is way, 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 way less. So it's always good to be prepared for an attack and not be trying to figure this out when you're in the pressure situation. So how do you prepare, right? Yeah, good segue, right? What do the feds say? They say a lot of gobbledygook. It sounds very government, but basically they say you have to evaluate whether to pay or not, right? And of course, it's a business decision. And most of it is driven by how much of a pressure situation you're in and whether you don't have good technology to restore your systems. At the end of the day, you're going to have to spend a lot of money verifying your data and making sure it doesn't happen again. But if you don't have a good backup system, if you don't have a good way to verify your data, if you haven't made those initial investments in cybersecurity, you may have to pay and you might not have a choice. So what can you do? Well, you have to invest in the best technology, right? I like endpoint technology. So endpoint technology is, of course, moving that endpoint detection and response, moving cybersecurity closest to the person who will screw up, to that laptop, to that phone, to that tablet, to the iPads and iPhones and Androids, and every which way that someone will access data, because they're going to access data from home, and they're going to do it from hotels, and they're going to do it from Starbucks and coffee shops. And so you need to move your technology, your cybersecurity, as close to the person who will click on that link, like the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Anyone can do it, and make that mistake. And that will help to save you, because if that's locked out right there, if suddenly that malware hits and it stops right on that endpoint, then you've just saved yourself a whole lot of heartache. You have to use strong passwords and audit regularly to make sure people use strong passwords and they're changing their passwords. Otherwise, you'd be like a lot of people. It turns out most people in the United States, probably the world, but I know the data for the US, never actually change their password until they're forced to. So their personal passwords might be the same passwords that they've had for years and years and years. I get it. You come up with the best password in the world. You think no one's ever going to beat it. No one's ever going to crack it. That might be true, unless they just stole it from Yahoo or stole it from Facebook or stole it from anyone else or just bought it on the dark web. Because as good as your password is, if someone else who you've used it on gets breached and it's out there for sale, there it goes. Patch systems and vulnerabilities. Let's go back to WannaCry, right? Everybody knew it was coming. Nobody patched. And then a month later, after that devastating attack, everybody knew NotPetya was coming. Nobody patched. These are the kind of things that can cause massive problems. Deploy two-factor authentication. Now, I know these sound like simple things, but you'd be shocked. I know that not many of you guys are all the successful ones, but you'd be shocked how many small businesses and how many enterprises don't actually do these basic things that can save you. If you're not using two-factor authentication, you're already done. And use it personally for all your bank accounts, for all the accounts you possibly can, because it can save you from that phishing attack. You need to have a preparedness plan. Like I say, don't wait for the pressure situation to invest in cybersecurity. Don't wait until you're in the middle of a ransomware attack and all of your screens are locked to figure out what you're going to do. Be prepared. Be a Boy Scout. I guess you can't say that anymore. Be a BSA Scout. That just changed. Train your employees. Yep, the employees will screw up no matter how much training you give them, but at least some of them aren't going to click on that link, right? And that will help them be better at home too. Don't allow remote logons directly from the public internet. There was a case where during the During the 2016 election attacks, one thing the Russians were doing is they were going to hotels and waiting for people that they wanted to target, overcoming the hotels network, and then using that to jump onto the networks that people were using when they logged into the hotel's router. I mean, compromise a hotel, and then you can compromise the person who logs on. You've got to be careful when you're using any kind of public internet. Nothing in the world is free. Remember that. Nothing is free. Someone always has an angle. And then finally, and one of the key things, which is why I put this at the end, routinely back up your systems. The number one way to overcome and survive a ransomware attack is to have a phenomenal backup system. It has to be good, it has to be fast, and it has to be able to you have to be able to restore quickly so you don't have massive downtime. You're gonna have some, but the best solutions don't cause that downtime. But here's the other key. You can't just back up. You have to make sure that backup isn't going to be compromised by the same malware that locked your systems, because most new vectors of ransomware, once they hit your systems, they start looking for every connected backup. So you have to actually, at some point, remove those backups or isolate them from the system that might be compromised. And then finally, you need to have a way to verify that the data in your backup when you restore it is the same data that was there when you made the backup. Because otherwise, what a ransomware attacker can do, because remember, these are spies. There are no hackers. There are only spies, because hacking is nothing more than the necessary evolution of espionage. What the attackers will do is they may lock you with ransomware, but go into your backup and just change things, subtle changes, things that allow them to come back later. So when you restore from backup, you've reloaded the malware and caused yourself just to reset in the same place that you were and leave yourself open to an attack. So all these things are things that you can do to make yourself safe from ransomware and really think about how to protect yourself in the future. So with that, and man, I've spoken a lot, I'm going to turn it over to our friends here who are going to give you a little bit more information about what you do. But while this is happening, remember those questions you want to ask, and we're going to come right back to me and I'm going to answer those. Thank you all really much.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, as you just mentioned, please do put in your questions. We'll get back to those in just a minute. In the meantime, we will talk a little bit about how SureWeb can help you with that. Hey, is everybody as scared as me right now? This certainly didn't put me at ease. I think the burden of knowledge is part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think it's great that we're all now a little bit more aware of what's been going on. And I think that's definitely part of the solution. To as many people should know this stuff. Never assume people are doing the wrong thing on purpose. I think it's more of a case of people not knowing exactly what they want to do or what they have to do or what to expect. I think once people know, especially people that work in IT, they're very conscientious, so they'll do the right thing. I think information is what's going to help us get there.
Absolutely.
So a lot of the advice I give on cybersecurity have already been covered right here by Eric, so this is great, very aligned, but also it makes my job so much easier. I'll focus right now on the product and services of SureWeb for a little bit. Then we'll talk about our partner program, which is probably of interest to most people that are here, and then we'll get back to the Q&A. So let me get started right now. As you've seen from the feedback and actually from the presentation, is security is layers, and that I didn't invent that. That's been true forever. Everybody says that. It is very relevant to this conversation. And somebody smarter than me came up with what they named the cybersecurity frame matrix. The idea there was that the advice is great. The understanding of what the attackers are doing is necessary. But then how do you translate that to product and services that you can apply to your organization, or in the case of our partners, your client's organization? And basically what this attempts to do is to take the two axes of how you deal with your organization and how you deal with cybersecurity, and give you a bit of a map, of a grid that you can fill with product and services, technology basically, to help you become more secure. So the first axis is the operational functions. So there is, actually it's the timeline of security. So there is a timeline to security. First, you start by trying to identify threats. Then you want to protect yourself. In case you fail to protect yourself, you want to detect what has happened. If that happens, then you want to be able to respond. And then ultimately, and this is often forgotten when we talk about cybersecurity, you want to be able to recover. That timeline can be then juxtaposed with the different aspects of things that you want to secure, which device, applications, network, data, and people. Never forget people. I think this is very clear. People are not good at security. I think I've heard that recently. I agree wholeheartedly. One of the conversations I often have with partners is why so much phishing? Like, how come there's so much? And I think we've covered most of that, but I think the very simple answer is because it works. If it didn't work, hackers, like was mentioned, are looking for a return on investment. Didn't work, they would stop. It works, they keep going. Same reason we get so much spam. People still click on spam, and it's so cheap to send. So basically, the grid that you see here is the cybersecurity matrix. In green, you can see the pre-compromise part of it, post-compromise being in red. And the idea is the first thing you should probably do with your client, or as a company, if you're in IT management, is do an assessment of how you cover those different aspects. Which part of your security tool belt will cover each and every part of this? As you can see in the bottom, there's two aspects to that: people and technology, and well, three aspects: people, technology, and process. The more upstream you are, the more it's about technology. Nobody's going to sit there and read all the logs to all their systems and firewalls and everything. You need technology to help you. As you get to the recovery part, it's more about people. It's about intervening to people and how you deal with them. There's still technology, but there's a lot more people involved. And throughout the whole thing, you need to have well-structured process. As was mentioned in the rest of the presentation, while you have a security event, is not the time to figure out what you want to do. You should have well-established process. You should put those into practice. You should do training. Let me go quickly about some of our product. I think one very key part, online backup. I say online backup because yes, backup would be part of it, but online is a much better way to defend against ransomware. So much of the ransomware now is smart enough to hunt down your backups and encrypt them, which make them completely useless. Those hackers are very smart, and they will take care of your backups if they can get access to it. Online backup's a much better way to do it. SureWeb's online backup is powered by Acronis, which is a well-established, well-respected company that has great products. SureWeb basically makes it as easy as possible to get their product, use it. A very simple billing model. You can see some of the most important selling points here. One of them, and that's very relevant to this conversation, is encryption. So encryption when somebody else controls it, bad. Encryption when you control it is an important part of your security process. So that people that get access to your backup for some reason wouldn't be able to get access to the data without that password. So SureWeb Online Backup support AES 256 encryption. You own the key. We do not. If you lose the key, then too bad, so sad, you lose access to your backup, because that's the only way to have really useful security and encryption. Let me move on to the, one thing that I want to mention. Backup is often forgotten as part of security. So people see backup and security as two separate things. They are not. Recovery is absolutely part of security, so backup is part of security as well. We talked about a lot about ransomware, where even if you pay, you may not get your key or your decryption mechanism. But one thing that was mentioned to me in the past that really sort of turned on the lights on that conversation is, think of it the other way. Think of it as the attacker who's looking to make money. If you pay, maybe they give you your key, fine, but you are now my favorite target. I will send you more ransomware in the future. As soon as I get a new strain, I will send it to you because you're one of the people that pay. You are now a great target market. And that's a scary thought. So as is the advice of most security professional, paying might be the only solution, but it's not a good solution. A much better solution is a online backup that is well implemented and has been tested for recovery. You can see on the screen here all the different type of endpoints that are covered by our online backup solution. The easy way to look at it is it covers pretty much everything, which is important, including email, including Office 365. Another one of our products is one that I'm very proud of because my team created it. It's a software as a service created internally at SureWeb called Office Protect. I won't go into a lot of detail about it, but basically there's a very simple mechanism to get the most out of the security of Office 365. It is very targeted at people that do not go to the extra length to buy all the expensive product of security of Office 365. Honestly, it's a very good idea if you are somebody that's in a compliance requirement or a potential target. You should look into those, but Office Protect is meant to raise the baseline security for everybody. It will help you with best practice security setting for Office 365, and it will help you monitor it. You should look into it. It's cheapest chip. We've really created it so everybody can use it, and everybody should. We've talked about email being the gateway to a lot of problems. There's a lot of security options that are part of Office 365. So if you get Office 365 through us or sell Office 365 through us, you should look at, for example, Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. We also have Proofpoint, again, well-known brand. They offer email protection, archiving, encryption, DLPs, and things like that. You should definitely have a look, talk to your account representative if you're interested. Again, very simple solution, but very, very efficient. If you want to even just reduce the number of phishing emails that you get, this is also a very good solution. So quick word before you get to the Q&A, quick word on SureWeb and why you should deal with us as a partner. Basically, one of the main aspects is that we will work with you closely and enable you to do a lot more. Our partners are all very conscientious of security, but they may not be completely equipped. Very few managed service providers, according to our surveys, can afford to hire a security professional. The idea is you should really lean on SureWeb. We will work with you from pre-sales to sales to helping you with marketing and website and all that stuff, all through a very competent and friendly account manager. If you have more questions, you should visit our website, sherweb.com/partners, to become a partner. You can just send us an email at partners@sherweb.com. We will now get to the Q&A section. I'll let Nick go through the questions because I don't think I have access to them here.
All right. Yes, I do have a couple of questions. We'll try to go through them. So first question is for Eric. During the presentation, you mentioned that user training wasn't effective or something of that effect. Why does it feel that way, or what is a better approach?
Right. So just to clarify, user training is effective and important, but it is not going to solve the problem. That's what I said. You can't solve the problem of training alone, because attackers are clever. So if we're going to think, the reason that I want to, let me tell a quick story. The reason that I want people to think about spies, not just a cyber criminal, is because it elevates our thought into a more sophisticated attacker. You'd be shocked at how many audiences, when I say hacker, they think some guy in a basement tapping on a keyboard with a hoodie. That's the Hollywood version of a hacker, right? If I ask people, put in your mind a hacker, that's what they'll come up with. Because that's what TV and movies give us, and it's wrong. These aren't the people out there that are causing this catastrophic events. They're not the people out there that are causing the massive breaches. It's sophisticated attack groups. It's people working in concert, and they learn a lot about their target. So you can't assume that by training all of your employees not to click on links and not to open emails, that you're going to be 100% safe, because you're not. You need technology to augment those people who will make the mistake. So think of it this way. The attacker is using sophisticated technology to attack a person. They're not trying to break into your computer systems. They're trying to do it through a person. They get the person to click the link or to open the attachment or to execute the attack for them. A person who's already inside and is trusted in your network. That's how they get in. So they have to fool that person. Often what they'll do is learn a lot about that person, go through their social media, look at who they are on LinkedIn, find out what they've been doing in the last weekend on Facebook, in order to create a spear phishing, not just a phishing attack, but a spear phishing attack, one that spears right at that person, that makes them click because they think they can trust it. And that is espionage, and that's spies. So you need something, you need a safety net beyond just that person that you trained. Now, you know, we just heard about people technology, people, and process, right? We've been saying that for a long time, and that's exactly true. All three of those things are necessary if we want to make a world safe from cyber attacks. We also need collaboration. That's something that I didn't mention, sort of something that can happen, but I think if we're going to talk about the future of protecting from cyber attacks, we need a lot more collaboration. So it's wonderful. I speak at cyber conferences every other week, and it does my heart well every time I see them, because these are people collaborating, trying to find solutions to this massive problem before it gets any worse. So yeah, you need that training. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that the spies will get around it. So you need that technology to be your safety net, to be your backup, to really stop that event from happening.
Okay,
Great
so
question.
Eric, we have another question regarding a bit more your story. Someone asked, if the USSR did not crumble and their spy were not heading for the hills, would you ever been able to uncover Robert Hanson?
That's a good question. So it's actually a really great question. What makes Hanson wonderful, right, as a spy? So he's a terrible person. I don't say it that way. I say it just as a counterintelligence professional looking at his career. What made him so great as a spy, what made him able to hide for all these years, is he was so good, he was able to overcome the crumbling of the Soviet Union. And what he did is he went dormant, and then he reactivated himself when the Soviet Union reformed into the Russian Federation. Pretty amazing, right? Because we were catching all the Cold War spies, because all these KGB guys were selling us our secrets, but we never actually caught Robert Hanson. There are a few reasons for that. One, he never told the Russians who he was. He volunteered his services. He sent them a letter. He had a code name. He actually had two code names. His first code name was B, literally the letter B. I guess it stood for boring. It was just a letter. They had no idea who he was. They didn't know whether he was in the FBI or in the CIA. In fact, the Russians thought he was in the CIA. And I guess later on in his career, when he realized, I'm probably the most prominent spy in history, he changed his code name from B for boring to Ramon Garcia, which I think he felt was a little bit sexier and would look better in the history books. So he continued to spy. He never let them know who he was. And the way that he stole information was clever. He would get on task forces with other agencies and steal their information and drop that to the Russians. That way, the Russians never really knew where he was. So our spies working for us in Russia couldn't tell us that, oh, we think that we're getting this information from the FBI. Last point, those spies of ours, the Russians who were working for the US, working for the CIA, working for the FBI over in Russia, who maybe could have eventually figured out where this top spy was, that he was in the FBI, that he was in FBI counterintelligence, that he was actually working the Soviet desk, they were killed. He gave up their names knowing that they would be killed. So he was ruthless, but also very smart in how he spied.
Great. We also have another question. Someone is asking, what is the best way to explain security risk to a client who are not tech savvy?
Yeah, that's a good, I do a lot of speaking to groups that have a combination of people. So we'll have our IT guys, and then we'll have the CEOs that tend not to know a lot about security. Well, some CEOs know a lot, but your basic one might not. To just people who are really interested in this, but haven't thought about it a lot. I like to break it down into stories. I love to tell that 2016 election attack story because it's so present in our mind. I like to put you in the mind of the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign, just sitting in some armchair. I know some of this is me imagining what it was like, but just sitting there with a cup of coffee, going through his phone and scrolling through until he sees an email that worries him. Gmail telling him, quickly change your email, your password on your Gmail account, because we've blocked an attempt to hack your account, but if you don't change your password, they might get through, right? That pressure situation, the fact that these are how attackers are doing it, and that if we invest, if the DNC, right, or the Hillary campaign had just invested in the good technology that could have protected them, or given John Podesta some training not to click on these links, or if that IT manager, right, had picked up the phone and called his boss instead of sending an email that gave the wrong information, none of this would have happened. If he had been using two-factor authentication, none of this would have happened. If there was good endpoint security, none of this would have happened. If they had good cybersecurity, the Russians would not have been able to do everything that they did. And part of this is learning the lesson. So find a story. Find a story about a real attack. Let them feel what it was like for someone who really suffered one of these. If you're just telling them statistics and stats, those go in all our ears and out the other. You need them because that gives you the gravitas, the statistical basis for what you're saying. But tell a story. Tell them a story about a real attack, and they'll be shocked because they will realize that could be me. That could be my business. If you're worried about ransomware, tell a story about a real ransomware attack. Tell that WannaCry story. That gets people worried. Now, I don't really like to talk as much through fear. It's harder for me during these webinars on stage. I'm a lot more funny. I crack jokes. I get audience feedback. Make it positive. You know, even when you tell your story about something bad that happened, talk about how all of these different things and go through the steps could have been done to prevent this. If only that person or that company had thought about it. If only they had seen this webinar and knew all the answers.
So I have a question for Guillaume, more on the product side. So how does your product protect against malware that seeks out backups?
Hi. Which product? All products?
So I would assume this is more towards our online backup product.
Right. So when I said that online backup was a much better solution to ransomware attack, yes. The idea is it's completely disconnected, and you want to make sure that that separation is always present. If they've, like, most likely most ransomware get in through email, and then they get onto your local station, and then you get onto your local network, and then move laterally. They will seek out through network shares and things like that. They will seek out backup of common formats or in common locations of popular software. The idea with online backups is only accessible through that web portal with a different combination of login and password, different identity. So that's how online backup is generally seen as a much more secure way of protecting yourself from ransomware than just regular backup. One of recent ransomware attack, and I'm bad with names, don't remember the name, as Eric mentioned, the branding sometimes, the ransomware is not the best, was specifically targeting local Veeam installations, and that's a very scary thought.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, you know, I was talking about WannaCry. WannaCry, when it corrupted and encrypted the version of Windows that it sought to attack, and it sought that version of Windows because the exploit actually would compromise the operating system and then use a network connection between different operating systems of different other Windows machines that were networked to that machine to leap, and that's why it spread so quickly. It would also go out and destroy all of the Microsoft restore points. So the internal backup system used by the operating system, it would destroy all those backups. So people who thought they had backed up would go look and find, I don't have them. So backing up to the cloud is a way of, in a way, it's like air gapping. You know how you see those jokes about the nuclear power plants, and they always show like people inside the control rooms, and they're updating the firmware and the plant systems, and they're using floppy disks. Remember floppy disks? They're like wop, 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 right? They're using floppy disks because there's no connections to the internet. There's no connections to other workstations. They have to use a physical medium in order to install the updates. That's called air gapping. That way people can't get into nuclear power plants through the corporate IT network. And that's kind of what we want, because we sort of want to protect those. So if you use the cloud, that is a way of air gapping the systems that could be corrupted from that backup that's somewhere else. And it's protected. Now, I'm all for the cloud. I come from the government. In the government, we were all taught to fear the cloud, to worry about the cloud, to be scared of the cloud. And the FBI was just nervous about it, and now they're using it. There's no way to get away from it. It just, the resources you can get there are extraordinary.
I think we'll take one last question for you, Eric. So is it all possible to prosecute spies, or is it really impossible due to location? So unless their physical location is known.
Hey, awesome question. So let's talk about cyber spies, and let's talk about other spies. Let's talk about spies in general. If we catch a spy here in the act of espionage and they don't have diplomatic protection, right? We can prosecute them here in the United States. So if we catch what's called like a Russian illegal, like for example, the FBI ghost stories from I think it was 2010, 2011, the 11 Russian illegals, including Anna Chapman and the Murphys and the Foleys, who were caught here in the US, who were working in our businesses and stealing and sending things to Russia. We can prosecute them there, and we did arrest them and could prosecute them. Butina, who was over here with no, Maria Butina, who was over here with no diplomatic protection, we arrested her and prosecuted her as a spy. So we can, if they're here in the United States and not working through an embassy with diplomatic protection, which is where most spies work. That's why you see most of these spies working out of the embassies. Now, the bad guys over in, say, Russia or China, who are intelligence officers, who are cyber spies, or even the cyber criminals who sometimes are picked up and they work for the government in order to attack the US, we've done a good job of figuring out who they are by going back through the kill chain and looking at the code and looking at it where it came from and tracking down IP address and finding these guys. We have indicted dozens of them in court. And we've sent those indictments over to China and Russia and other places and said, can you send us these guys to sit for trial here in the US? And the answer has been a lot like this. You guys are crazy. So no, they're never going to send their spies over here. But if they ever travel and they land in a country that has extradition to the United States, they will get grabbed by Interpol and sent over here. So in one sense, that Russian wears it as a badge of honor that he's been indicted in the US, and, you know, like, I am the great cyber attacker, right? And all their friends say, yes, they are, bow down to you. But they can never really go on vacation anywhere cool because they'll end up in court here.
All right, that's fascinating. So I think that was all for the time that we had today. Maybe there's just one last thing that we wanted to talk about. Guillaume, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. First, I want to thank Eric for sure. I want to thank everybody that has attended. Like I said, you will get a recording of this presentation. If you want to talk to our account representative about the services of SureWeb, that will be easy as well. The last thing we wanted to mention is we have our own summit, basically, where we invite all our partners to come and talk to us and learn about our products. Acronis will be there, amongst other. I will be there. If you want to talk to me about cybersecurity, I'll be happy to do it. Always happy to talk to our partners. This year it is in Montreal from October 9 to 11. The URL is here. So thank you very much, Eric, for participating in this webinar. This was very informative. I think everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I wish you a great and safe day.
Yeah, and if you want to catch me, and if you didn't get your question answered, I'm pretty good about answering questions on Twitter. If you want to catch me there at EONEILL. And if you're interested in the things I've been talking about, if you want to know more about the spies or the spy story, my book Gray Day just came out. You can get that anywhere books are sold. That's what they tell me to say. And it talks all about the evolution of espionage from the 80s at the end of the Cold War until today, and hopefully through a pretty thrilling spy story tells why we're suffering so many cyber attacks. Thank you all for listening to me for the last